that is Bill number 9 of 2023. Mr. Speaker, I first of all want to thank the members of the Budget and Appropriations Committee for a good job they have done in the recent past, and especially in making sure that we take our primary role as a House for budget making with the decorum that it deserves. Mr. Speaker, the members have also been very dedicated because, as you are aware, it is a very intense process, and basing on the disruption of the calendar from last year because of the elections, we have had to consider three important critical areas of budget making within a very short time. Mr. Speaker, within last month, we were able to pass the supplementary estimates. Last week, we were able to consider the BPS. And Mr. Speaker, from then, we have been considering the division of revenue bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just to bring to speed the members, because I want to take very little time, when we talk about the division of revenue bill, what is it that we are talking about? Mr. Speaker, this is the bill that allocates money vertically insofar as the national government is concerned and the county governments. Mr. Speaker, this bill considers a block figure because there is a subsequent bill that considers horizontal allocation, which is called the County Allocation of Revenue Bill, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I would want members to get the difference, and even in regards to the other jargons we talk about here in Parliament. And just taking a brief moment, Mr. Speaker, it is good to update members that substantially budget making process starts on the November of the previous year. In this current situation, budget making started in November, October last year through something that we call sector working groups, where different sectors come together, different departments come together, forming clusters of sectors, and then, Mr. Speaker, they work on their budget backwards. After that is considered, Mr. Speaker, then we do what we were doing here last week and what departmental committees have been doing for the last 2 or 3 weeks, where we consider ceilings of our budget, Mr. Speaker, and we consider departmental ceilings and sectoral ceilings in regards to budget making. Mr. Speaker, that is the process, in other words, that we call budget policy statement, or BPS, which basically sets the ceilings of the sectors and ceilings of departments. Mr. Speaker, after that, we go now to what we call the estimates. After we do away with the BPS, what follows is now what we consider as the budget. These are the estimates, where after now we have allocated these block figures and the ceilings, then we cascade further. After we give, for example, the Department of Forestry this amount of money, it is now the annual estimates that now goes into specific projects. Mr. Speaker, that is in line with the main budget. Mr. Speaker, after 2010, we now have 2 levels of government to consider. And we consider them right from the inception of budget making. But it starts to take shape, Mr. Speaker, and especially as far as this House is concerned, through the process that we are considering today. Mr. Speaker, today's motion, we are debating around the vertical allocation of the monies that we remit to our counties, equivalent now to a kind of BPS that only touches on counties alone. Mr. Speaker, after now we do the block figure, it is the business of counties to do their main or to do their own budget lines. But it is the prerogative of this House, in conjunction with the Senate, again to allocate now this block figure that I'm going to give, that is a tune of 385 billion to specific counties, that is 47 counties. And Mr. Speaker, the way we do it is not the way we have been dealing, for example, with the CDF, where we take the figure and divide equally. Here is where now we have CRA coming in, the Commission on Revenue Allocation, which takes now this block figure, puts in a calculator called a formula, and then that formula calculates what from county 001 to county 047 gets. And Mr. Speaker, that will be our next business, which is called now the County Allocation of Revenue Bill. Mr. Speaker, I thought it's good that I demystify these jargons so that we are able to handle this matter objectively. And therefore, just to repeat, the Division of Revenue Bill, the reason it is so brief, it is because it considers a block figure. And then the specifics in terms of what each county gets, that is on a different bill, Mr. Speaker, which is the County Allocation of Revenue Bill, which this House, in conjunction with the Senate, will be considering. Mr. Speaker, because devolution has a monetary side, that is why the National Assembly is very integral. But on the other side, when we are discussing county matters, then the Senate is also very pivotal. That is why the Senate has already been able to consider the same thing we are considering today, and also they'll be very integral in considering the County Allocation of Revenue Bill. Mr. Speaker, what are the kind of figures that you are considering? The budget, as we did in the BPS last week, we are talking about a budget of approximately 3.6 trillion Kenya shillings, the global figure. Mr. Speaker, out of the 3.6 trillion Kenya shillings, Kenya 2.1 trillion is the money that will be running the national government. And these monies will be running the national government insofar as recurrent and development is concerned. That is 2.1 trillion Kenya shillings. The second highest allocation insofar as BPS is concerned, and also we have given the summary in this bill, the second highest from national government, Mr. Speaker, it is what we call consolidated fund services. Some of these things, Mr. Speaker, when I get an opportunity like this, I repeat them, Mr. Speaker, so that they cease to be jargons and they become issues that we can freely discuss. CFS, Mr. Speaker, is the monies that we spend in paying the interest rate of the monies that we have borrowed, servicing our national debt. That is both domestic and also foreign, and especially in regards to interest. It is the same CFS, Mr. Speaker, that has got pensions in them, and also the monies that we give to our commissions, Mr. Speaker, and other such very important obligations. The other third allocation, Mr. Speaker, is what we are discussing today within the Division of Revenue Bill. Because on the vertical allocation, Mr. Speaker, out of the 3.6 trillion Kenya shillings, Mr. Speaker, we are giving our counties the normal allocation of Kenya shillings, 385 billion Kenya shillings. Mr. Speaker, this is an increment of 15 billion over and above the 370 that the counties were to receive last year. Mr. Speaker, in addition to that, it is important that I mention to this House that these are not the only funds that our counties will receive. Mr. Speaker, we will also be coming to this House with another bill again called additional revenue, Mr. Speaker, that we give to our counties. Mr. Speaker, this is where we include the conditional grants, both from the national government and from external foreign counterparts, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the entire conditional grant insofar as this year is concerned is just around 44 billion Kenya shillings. Within that money, Mr. Speaker, there is a 4.7 billion Kenya shillings, which you are giving to every county, 100 million shillings for the construction of industrial parks. Mr. Speaker, this is a project that has been agreed upon between the President and the governors, where the national government will chip in and the counties will meet us in some way so that we are able to establish industrial centers and parks within our counties. And therefore, cumulatively, Mr. Speaker, if you add 385 and 44, then we are talking about monies that goes to nearly 330 actually billion Kenya shillings. Mr. Speaker, as far as the law is concerned, how do we derive at the amount of money that we actually allocate vertically to our counties? It is very clear, Mr. Speaker, that counties are entitled to 15% of the revenues, Mr. Speaker, that have been submitted by the Auditor General to this House, debated and passed by this House. Mr. Speaker, the last financials that were passed by this House is 2019-2020. And Mr. Speaker, therefore, we are considering revenues of around 1.6 trillion Kenya shillings. Mr. Speaker, therefore, the money that we are giving our counties vertically accounts for around 23.3%, which is over and above the threshold of 15%, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I mentioned there before that this is in addition to the other conditional grants that our counties receive. Mr. Speaker, we got from our brothers and sisters from the Senate, which had considered that the counties were to receive ordinary remittances from the national government to a tune of 407 billion. Mr. Speaker, we faulted our other house because of the consideration and basis. The basis in terms of the laws that we use is the last audited financials, Mr. Speaker, financial statements. But Mr. Speaker, Senate was basing their figure of 407 billion to the projected revenue of this financial year. That has its pitfalls, Mr. Speaker, because you cannot budget issues of money on projections. And especially if, when you cast the figure on stone, then you cannot change it. Mr. Speaker, the figure we are considering today, once you consider it, it can only be fulfilled. And therefore, it is important that we base such kind of important figure on the basis of reality and fact. Mr. Speaker, I also want to bring to this House, and especially the members who were there before last term, must have noted that there is the money for maintenance of roads, roads maintenance levy fund, Mr. Speaker. Last term, our first 3 years, Mr. Speaker, these monies, some were coming to what now is KERA in our regions, the one that we superintend in our constituencies, and a sizable amount was also being transferred to our counties. Mr. Speaker, in the last 2 years, this has changed, and that has led to the enhancement of the road maintenance levy fund that comes to our constituencies, and especially the 22% and the 10% to where it is now, which moved from approximately 30 million per constituency to 60 million per constituency. Mr. Speaker, it is the feeling of the committee that we retain that as it is, Mr. Speaker, because the counties, the constituencies are a smaller units, Mr. Speaker, of governance, and we are able, Mr. Speaker, as members of parliament, and especially as KERA, to be able to see the roads that clearly disturb our people and act on them. Mr. Speaker, this is because our brothers and sisters in counties also have, within their normal allocation, monies for road maintenance, Mr. Speaker, and therefore that status quo for the last 2 years is remaining as we pass this bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are just a few things I want to say, then we give other members an opportunity. Number one is that there has been 5 counties that never had district headquarters, which we are considering even on this division of revenue bill, Mr. Speaker, through conditional grants, that they complete their ongoing headquarters. Some like the Rakanidhi is almost complete, nearly complete for the last many years. And because, Mr. Speaker, any construction site, whatever percent it is, it only starts to get utility, Mr. Speaker, when the citizens are using it. It behoves of this House that we consider allocating those resources so that we complete those ongoing headquarters in 5 constituencies. Mr. Speaker, Our governors also are doing a fantastic job, and as fellow leaders, it is important that we support them. And we have done that in the past in the committee, where even in the supplementary estimates, we considered the arrears of yesteryears, Mr. Speaker, which had not been remitted. But on the same breath, Mr. Speaker, we have noted that majority of our CECs from across the counties spent majority of their time following up money, Mr. Speaker, to be released. They move from the Office of the Controller of Budget to the National Treasury. Mr. Speaker, it should not be the business of our CECs to keep on following up money, Mr. Speaker. We must devise a formula where the money that the exchequer gives or receives, Mr. Speaker, they are able to allocate that money even to our counties without a lot of pushing, so that we leave our CECs finance to be able to superintend the monies within their counties, other than wasting time, Mr. Speaker, in the Controller of Budget's office and the National Treasury. Mr. Speaker, therefore, it is important that I note that this committee noted that anomaly, that we should be able to streamline and get a formula on how exchequer is allocated, Mr. Speaker, even within the circumstances of scarcity. Mr. Speaker, as we talk about pending bills, this is a menace within the national government, and also it is also endemic in our county governments, Mr. Speaker. And some of these issues are not of the making of the current governors. These are a historical problem, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we allocate this money vertically, it is important that even as the national government sorts out the issues of pending bills, even our beloved governors from across all counties, and who are doing a fantastic job in our counties, to also consider, Mr. Speaker, paying the men and women of this country who have already worked and done works within our counties and that are owed colossal amounts of money, Mr. Speaker, in our counties. This will enhance velocity of money in our localities. It will enhance the taxonomies of various counties, and there, Mr. Speaker, also generate a velocity that we need, and especially insofar as the macroeconomy is concerned, the velocity of money. Mr. Speaker, also something else that our governors can check, which has been endemic, not just the making of the current governors, it is the issue of recurrent versus development. Majority of these monies that we are allocating today, Mr. Speaker, the huge proportion of the 385 billion, most of this money, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, is going into recurrents, to paying salaries, Mr. Speaker, which is an noble thing, but we must be able to realize that as leaders, the governments do not exist to service the engine of the government. The government exists to service the people who have placed us in these positions. And we can only service these people, Mr. Speaker, if most of the money that we allocate goes into service delivery, and especially in development. Mr. Speaker, lastly, I would want also to speak to our governors, whom majority have been also members of this House and the Senate, that the national government is doing everything possible to raise our own revenue as a country. So, Mr. Speaker, our counties must realize that they cannot continue to operate and to function properly and efficiently when they are almost purely relying on the exchequer from the national government. Mr. Speaker, our counties have got powers to levy taxes, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, the kind of proportion of money that we see in terms of own revenue is not commensurate with the opportunities that our counties have in terms of raising their own revenue. Mr. Speaker, we must enhance, and our counties must enhance their capacity to generate their own internal resources, Mr. Speaker, so that we can also deliver proper service to the people that we serve in our counties. Mr. Speaker, there has to be in future a collective effort, and especially within the National Treasury, to come up with a system that amalgamates the entire collection of our various counties, Mr. Speaker, so that they can be assisted with proper systems, and especially by eliminating human contact in revenue collection, so that we can beef up our A&A, in quotes, that comes from our counties, so that, Mr. Speaker, our people can enjoy the service from our counties in regards to the taxes and levies that they pay. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you and thank you this, and thank this House, Mr. Speaker, for the continued support across the many obligations that you have been having in the recent past. And Mr. Speaker, with those very many remarks, I beg to move, Mr. Speaker, and request Honorable Dr. Chikati to second.